Howdy. Welcome back. This is a response to your response to my response to your video. And it'll be a fun one. And thank you for being essentially polite, which is pretty rare these days. Libertarians tend to have a pretty narcissistic and sociopathic quality that if you challenge or even question anything, they go postal. So thank you for being polite at least. So, now, for your questions, there's a problem because you're right, I shouldn't just make statements without proving it. And the issue of the Austrian school and the Keynesians, that's an important issue, so since it's a lengthy subject, I'll cover it in another video. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Alright, now on the other issues, or the questions you had, now, from what I can guess, basically your problem with Mr. Heffernan is that you're challenging whether he's an authority or not to say what he's saying. And I'm saying, well, why not? He seems to have an insight. I mean, he's not discussing anything secret, right? He's talking about the period from the crash to 32 and the response from people and the mentality of people. And I think it's important that he brought up the issue of tragedy, right? Because Shakespeare and Schiller and Aeschylus, and right, these were all dramatists describing, like I said, all people being killed by the mistakes they make. And of course, we've got universal history is full of dead civilizations that make stupid mistakes, right? So again, why not? I mean, why isn't Mr. Heffernan an authority to say what he said? Right? He's simply describing the stupid mistakes the leaders made at that time to the crisis. I assume that's what your general gist is about, is because he's an elected official that makes him not an authority? I mean, he seems to have somewhat of an insight at least, because think of when he was at the Chamber of Commerce event. He had to basically burst everybody's bubble because they all wanted to go and just push the accepted line. And he had to come in and say, fuck that. And afterwards, they came up to him and said, "Yeah, man, you're right. But, we gotta go along to get along, Alright, so, to be, I want to be sort of polemical. So I'm going to read you two quotes from two different people. You might know them. And these are both from 1927. And then I want to bring in a historian to talk about a more universal approach to history, right? So let me do that. Okay, so the first quote: "I could not help by being charmed, like so many other people have been, by Signor Mussolini. Gentle, simple bearing, and by his calm, detached poise in spite of so many burdens and dangers. Secondly, anyone could see that he thought of nothing but the lasting good, as he understood it, of the Italian people, and that no lesser interest was of the slightest consequence to him. If I had been an Italian, I am sure that I would have been wholeheartedly with you from the start to finish in your triumphant struggle against the bestial appetites and passions of Leninism. I will, however, say a word on an international aspect of fascism. Externally, your movement has rendered service to the whole world. The great fear which has always been beset every democratic leader, or a working class leader, has been that of being undermined by someone more extreme than he. Italy has shown that there is a way of fighting the subversive forces which can rally the masses of the people, properly led, to value and wish to defend the honor and stability of civilized society. She has provided the necessary antidote to the Russian poison. Hereafter, No great nation will be unprovided with an ultimate means of protection against the cancerous growth of Bolshevism. And the second quote: so much for the domestic policy of fascism. That its foreign policy, based as it is on the avowed principle of force in international relations, cannot fail to give rise to an endless series of wars that must destroy all of modern civilization, requires no further discussion. To maintain and further raise our present level of economic development, peace among nations must be assured. But they cannot live together in peace if the basic tenet of the ideology by which they are governed is the belief that one's own nation can secure its place in the community of nations by force alone. It cannot be denied that fascism and similar movements aiming at the establishment of dictatorships are full of the best intentions, and that their intervention has, for the moment, saved European civilization. The merit that fascism has thereby won for itself will live on eternally in history. But though its policy has brought salvation for the moment, it is not of the kind which could promise continued success. Fascism was an emergency makeshift. To view it as something more would be a fatal error. Full of the best intentions. Interesting. Well, the first one was Winston Churchill speaking in Rome in 1927. And the second one is Ludwig von Mises speaking as he was in the Chamber of Commerce in Vienna, and an advisor to the Dollfuss government. There you go, Mr. Freedom. Okay, so I'm going to read Friedrich Schiller in a lecture he gave on to what end do we study universal history? Because this might get at your issue of my denunciation of academics. And the case that I was talking about, in terms of my problem with the way historians are, the two worst examples I can think of, in terms of people who shouldn't even call themselves historians, are Thomas D. Lorenzo and Howard Zinn. Two complete scumbags on either end. I mean, Zinn, you probably know about, right? That stupid book of his. It's like the neocons, right? Cherry picking to get the desired result. That's all he did, essentially. The thesis is white people suck. I'm going to basically get every fact that I can, take it completely out of context in order to prove that white people suck. So, De Lorenzo, right? He's what you call a poison pen, right? Somebody hired by the Mises Institute to slander Hamilton, Roosevelt, and Lincoln. That's all. No different than Zinn. Okay, so back to Schiller. The course of studies which the scholar who feeds on bread alone sets himself is very different from that of the philosophical mind. The former, for all his diligence, is interested merely in fulfilling the conditions under which he can form a vocation and enjoy its advantages, who activates the powers of his mind only thereby to improve his material conditions and to satisfy a narrow-minded thirst for fame. Such a person has no concern upon entering his academic career, more important than distinguishing most carefully those sciences which he calls studies for bread from all the rest. which delight the mind for their own sake. Such a scholar believes that all the time he devoted to these latter, he would have to divert from his future vocation, and this thievery he could never forgive himself. He will direct all of his diligence to the demands made upon him by the future master of his fate, and he will believe he has achieved everything once he has made himself capable of not fearing this authority. Once he has run his course and attained the goal of his desires, he dismisses the sciences which guided him, for why should he bother with them any longer? His greatest concern now is to display these accumulated treasures of his memory, and to take care that their value not depreciate. Every extension of his bread science upsets him, because it portends only more work, or it makes the past useless. Every important innovation frightens him, because it shatters the old school form which he so laboriously adopted. It places him in danger of losing the entire effort of his preceding life. Who rants more against reformers than the gaggle of bread-fed scholars? Who more holds up the progress of useful revolutions in the kingdom of knowledge than these very men? Every light radiated by a happy genius, and whichever science it be, makes their poverty apparent. Their foils are bitterness, insidiousness, and desperation. For in the school system they defend, they do battle at the same time for their entire existence. On that score, there's no more irreconcilable enemy, no more jealous official, no one more eager to denounce heresy than the bread-fed scholar. The less his knowledge rewards him on its own account, the more he devours a claim thrown at him from the outside. He has but one standard for the work of the craftsman, as well as the work of the mind: effort. Thus, one hears no one complain more about ingratitude than the bread-fed scholar. He seeks his reward not in the treasures of his mind. His recompense he expects from the recognition of others, from positions of honor, from personal security. If he miscarries in this, who is more unhappy than the bread-fed scholar? He has lived, worried, and worked in vain. He has sought in vain for truth, if for him this truth not transfer itself into gold, published praise, and princely favor. Pitiful man, who with the noblest of all tools, with science and art, desires and obtains nothing higher than the day laborer with the worst of tools, who in the kingdom of complete freedom drags an enslaved soul around with him. Still more pitiful, however, is the young man of genius whose natural, beautiful stride is led astray by harmful theories and models upon this sad detour, who is persuaded to collect ephemeral details for his future vocation, so wretchedly meticulous. His vocational science of patchwork will soon disgust him. Desires will awaken in him which it cannot satisfy. His genius will revolt against his destiny. Everything he does appears to him but fragments. He sees no purpose to his work, but purposelessness he cannot bear. The tribulation, the triviality in his professional business presses him to the ground, because he cannot counter it with the joyful courage which accompanies only the enlightened understanding, only expected perfection. He feels secluded, torn away from the connectedness of things, since he has neglected to connect these activity to the grand whole of the world. Jurisprudence disrobes the jurist as soon as the glimmer of a better culture casts its light upon the nakedness. Instead of his now striving to become a new creator of law, and to improve deficiencies now discovered out of his own inner wealth, the physician is estranged from his profession as soon as the grave errors demonstrate to him the unreliability of his system. The theologian loses respect for his calling as soon as his faith in the infallibility of his system begins to totter. How entirely different this philosophical mind comports itself. As meticulously as the bread-fed scholar distinguishes his science from all others, the latter strives to extend the reach of his own and to reestablish its bond with the others. Reestablish, I say, for only the abstracting mind has set these boundaries, has sundered these sciences from one another. Where the bread-fed scholar severs, philosophical mind unites. He early convinced himself that everything is intertwined in the field of understanding as well as in the material world. And his zealous drive for harmony cannot be satisfied with fragments of the whole. All his efforts are directed toward the perfection of his knowledge. His noble impatience cannot rest until all his conceptions have ordered themselves into an organic whole, until he stands at the center of his art, his science, and until from this position outward he surveys its expanse with a contented look. New discoveries in the sphere of his activities, which cast the bread-fed scholar down, delight the philosophical mind. Perhaps they fill a gap which had still disfigured the growing whole of his conceptions, or they set the stone still missing in the edifice of his ideas, which then completes it. Even should these new discoveries leave it in ruins, a new chain of thoughts, a new natural phenomenon, a newly discovered law in the material world overthrow the entire edifice of his science, no matter. He has always loved truth more than his system, and he will gladly exchange the old insufficient form for a new one, more beautiful. Indeed, if no blow from the outside shatters his edifice of ideas, he himself will be the first to tear it apart, discontented to reestablish it more perfect. Through always new and more beautiful forms of thought, philosophical mind strides forth to higher excellence, while the bread-fed scholar, in eternal stagnation of mind, guards over the barren monotony of his school conceptions. There is no fairer judge of the merits of others than the philosophical mind. Shrewd and imaginative enough to make use of every activity, he's also equitable enough to honor the creation of even the smallest contribution. All minds work for him. All minds work against the bread-fed scholar. The former knows how to transform everything around him, everything which happens and is thought, into his own possession. Among thinking minds is an intimate community of all goods of the mind, is in effect. What is obtained in the kingdom of truth by one is one for all. Bread-fed scholar fences himself in against all his neighbors, whom he jealously begrudges light and sun, and keeps worried watch over the dilapidated barrier, which but weakly defends him from or against victorious reason. For everything the bread-fed scholar undertakes, he must borrow incentive and encouragement from others. The philosophical mind, in his diligence, finds in his subject matter itself his incentive and reward. How much more enthusiastically can he set about his work? How much more lively will his eagerness be? How much more tenacious his courage and his activity? Because for him, work rejuvenates itself through work. Even small things become grand under his creative hand, because he always has the grand objective, which may serve in view, while the bread-fed scholar sees even in great things only that which is petty. It is not what he does, but how he treats what he does, which distinguishes the philosophical mind. Wherever he may stand and work, he always stands at the center of the whole, and however far from the object of his labors may draw him away from his other brothers, he is allied with them, and near them through a harmonically working understanding. He meets them where all enlightened minds find one another. So that's a good standpoint right there to discuss. First, is somebody who's an academic historian, is he qualified? Right? It's like quantifying what you said about the Hoover administration's bailouts at that time, because you just said that you only justified it in terms of quantity, and you didn't quantify it in terms of what was the bailout money going for, right? How much was to cover speculation, right? and how much was to cover actually real physical economic activity. Right? That's the difference between the Reconstruction Finance Corporation under Hoover and under Franklin Roosevelt. Right? So anyways, that's enough. That's pretty lengthy. And as soon as I can, I'll get you the other one. It'll take some preparation. But yeah, I'll try to get you this universal aspect of economics, so you can have a geometry of position to see if the Austrian school and the Keynesians are, well, you'll see. It'll be fun. Alright, so this is Drew. Thanks a lot for watching, and I know it was long, but I hope you got something out of it. Okay, bye-bye, see ya.